that AI is going to be trained on your own data if you want it to be valuable. So as long as you have that data and that strong foundation, you'll have an advantage.
How have you seen insights play an even more important role in those kinds of longer buying cycles, longer decision cycles when it comes to certain products and services?
Great question.
Today on the podcast, we'll be speaking to Greg Bucko. Greg is data product partner at Regions Bank, and he brings a wealth of experience when it comes to all things data. We'll be talking to him, of course, about AI and how leveraging AI and data is important, but in particular, how having the right infrastructure is critical to being able to take advantage of AI. We'll also be talking about the different skills that data leaders need to have for the future, in particular, developing creative skills, which will be so important for them to be able to have strong careers in data moving forward. And then we'll talk to Greg about data in general, and how is the best way for organizations to think about data in terms of measuring its ROI so they know why they need to invest in making sure they have the right infrastructure and are leveraging their data in the right way. We're very happy to have Greg with us. Let's get started. Greg, thank you so much for joining us this morning on the podcast. Very happy to have you with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for the invitation, Shamir.
One of the reasons I look forward to episodes like this is because of, has this been the case for the past 10, 15 years, really, the real emphasis on data that we have in our world of digital experience. And even though the hot term today is very much AI, even AI can't work without data, right? Without clean, structured data to be able to work with. So even though data is not the same kind of hot term as it was maybe a few years ago, certainly it is still foundational and integral to delivering an impactful digital customer experience. And it will continue to be because you're obviously only as smart as what you know. And that comes down to how you're gathering data, whether that's analytics about events and what people are doing and how they're behaving, or data around the actual customer themselves. So as someone who's been in the field of data and all its kind of shades and variations for the past several years, what kind of changes have you seen over the past 5 or 10 years in kind of the field of data and data analytics? And how has that affected companies and organizations as they're trying to kind of navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. You said I've been in it for a while. This is actually my 25th year of working in data analytics. So I have seen a lot, and I know I look too young for that to be true. So no need to say it.
Far too, you must have started in elementary school. I don't even know how you do it.
But obviously, AI is the conversation right now. It's actually taken a lot of the air out of the room, and for good reason, right? But I think what we're finding is people who have a strong data foundation, who have their data in order, who have a strong data governance are going to have an advantage in AI, right? So putting that aside, there's still a ton of incredible value just from the data. And there's a lot of organizations out there who are still immature in terms of using that data to move the needle, right? There are still companies out there who have not spent enough time really understanding their customer, building out the frameworks to do that, building out the databases to interact with their customers better, who are now pivoting to AI because maybe that's the solution. And I think a lot of them are probably finding out that the data itself, the foundation, is the most important thing going into having good AI because, that AI is going to be trained on your own data if you want it to be valuable. And so as long as you have that data and that strong foundation, you'll have an advantage. If you don't, it's still time to build those capabilities, right? And, one of the things I've talked to clients and others in the past few years about is, yes, AI is the hot buzzword, but there are plenty of traditional AI and machine learning capabilities that should still be brought to bear in your data analytics organization. And if you're not doing that, then you're doing yourself a disservice. So absolutely, you got to stick with the fundamentals, even in this era of AI, right?
It's funny that you mentioned it the way you did, because one of the things I know I've seen over my career, both on now the consulting side, previously on the corporate side, I'm absolutely positively sure you've seen, is you have these legacy enterprise organizations that have these legacy proprietary systems that don't, play well with others, so to speak, right? They don't integrate well with more modern, marketing technology platforms, don't integrate necessarily very cleanly with maybe customer data platforms, with CRM systems. Sometimes it's still challenging to get that data into data lakes or data warehouses because of the nature of how those systems work. And you've probably seen over the years, those companies just delay and lag in kind of upgrading those systems and getting them to a place where it's like, look, we can't continue to operate like this. We're going to have to some degree, we're going to have to improve our infrastructure. And when people see that number of what it's going to take to do that, the resources to do that, they're like, okay, we're not doing that. We're investing, and they keep kind of kicking the can down the road, so to speak, right? And now you're in a situation where, again, as you mentioned, AI is this hot, important thing. And what are we doing with AI, and how are we going to use AI, and so forth? And then people like you and me have to break the news of like, well, we can't do anything with AI because we can't even access the data to tell AI what to do. Like it needs, intelligence is only as good as knowledge, and there's we can't give it any knowledge, so we can't do anything because you have kicked this can down the curb so far, and we don't do that, right? So now they're in this situation where they're at this technical impasse, and it's like now you've got to address it, and you've got to make this investment, and it's probably going to be more expensive now than it would have been had you done it 5 or 10 years ago, and kind of and made that shift. But now you're at where you're at. So you've got these technical issues that are, blockers for many organizations that they can invest in. But let's take those technical issues for a second and let's put those to the side. How have you seen organizational, political, process, communication? How have you seen those issues be the blockers to being able to move forward from a data standpoint?
I think in my career, those are probably the biggest blockers, right? And spent a lot of times sort of early on in my career convincing people that data was important, right? We don't have to convince people anymore that data is important, but that was the story for a long time. And now the story is, how do I get ROI out of that data, right? And that's still a tough question to answer, right? And so one of the things that I think I try to encourage in those young people that I'm mentoring who are coming into analytics is to understand your business, understand how money flows, understand who the important people are in the business before you even worry about the data. Understand how communication gets done, and also have an agile mentality to these things, because you're going to have to be flexible, right? And you're also going to have to take a lot of punches, a lot of insights and a lot of great dashboards have been built in my career. And a lot of those insights were sometimes, ignored. And you kind of learn how to not take that personally, right? You learn how to flex your sort of communication muscles better, right? And that is, I think, the key to getting things done in data analytics is being able to communicate with executives, with leaders, understand the strategy in the business, and then the insights and the data products or whatever it is you're building have a much better chance of succeeding. And yeah. No, I was just going to say that's kind of the biggest lesson I think I've learned over the last, quarter century of doing this, is to just, listen more to your business, right? Understand the strategy and communicate clearly. And if you can do those things, you're going to have a much better time making a convincing argument for why the company needs to invest in a particular database or going from on-prem to cloud or whatever the conversation is.
That's an awesome way to look at it. And I'd love, for the sake of our listeners, to kind of break that down in kind of a couple of different avenues. So on the one hand, let's look at it purely from a kind of a business, kind of a financial perspective. So I know when we go in and we work with organizations, one of the things that we try to really evangelize to them is when they're thinking about things like optimization and experimentation, those kinds of things, that they shouldn't put that necessarily in the bucket of a revenue generating initiative the way they would, online ads. That should really look at that as kind of part of their production costs. Because, ultimately what that's doing is saying, this is what you should or shouldn't be doing. This is where you should or shouldn't be investing your time, your energy, your money, and your resources. And by doing that, you're going to end up investing those resources far more efficiently and effectively than you would have before. because there's stats out there that 90% of what companies do, that kind of the production changes they make are wasted. They don't end up actually improving the business. Some of them actually have a negative impact on the business. But by being able to make better decisions, you're more efficiently using those production resources. So building processes around things like experimentation help you to do that and be far more efficient. And that's a key role where data really plays into that, right? Because now you're getting a better understanding of your customer, understanding what has impacted them in the past, what will impact them in the future, right? Being predictive, being prescriptive about that, and looking at that less as, hey, it's just this cost center, and more as, no, this is a bigger component and kind of a part of everything you're doing from a production standpoint to make sure you're making the best decisions, and that you're aiming your blows in the right way, so that you're on the end, you're doing things that are going to have a net positive impact on the business. Is that something that you really have to yourself evangelize to executive leadership? Has you kind of really tell them about the importance of data and how they should look at data from a financial standpoint?
I mean, data is about decision making. It's about helping companies make better decisions. And that's always been sort of the gospel I've read from and have preached. And when you do that, when you set those expectations, then it's no longer about, hey, we want to drive revenue. It's about, okay, I understand my business better. And in fact, I'm probably going to save money. And how that's as good as the revenue, right? And so, and I think we're seeing that a lot too with AI, right? A lot of these people, it's hard to generate revenue with AI for a lot of traditional organizations. But it might be pretty easy to save money using AI, to optimize more effectively, to make better strategic decisions. And is that worth something? Absolutely. It should be worth something, right? It's valuable. And so, yeah, just focusing on data as a decision-making tool, I think has always been something I've tried to preach.
That kind of takes me to kind of the other side of this coin, so to speak, right? So now you've got an understanding, hopefully, organizationally, to say this is why we should invest in data, and this is the power that and the impact it can bring to the organization. But now you or whomever in the organization has the analyst, has kind of the data owner. Now you're in a position to say, okay, great. We're investing in the data. We're getting this information. Maybe we're leveraging AI to help us to get at the insights more quickly, to help us visualize the data more quickly. But the thing that AI can't do, where now you as the data person has to do, is you now have to tell the story. Right now it comes down to what you mentioned earlier, the importance of communication and how you're kind of framing that story in such a way that people kind of understand what they're being told and are able to more objectively move in the right direction to be able to make those better decisions and say, okay, this is what we're going to do and invest in. So how have you really tried to do your best to kind of get in your soapbox and really help people in the organization, help your students, as you mentioned, and you do some teaching, to really help them understand the importance of developing those kinds of skills as they become kind of data leaders of the future?
I mean, that's a great question. I tell them, first of all, focus on your PowerPoint skills as much as your Python skills, right? Be able to tell a good narrative, be creative. This is a creative art. Analytics, data, it's all, and even working with Gen AI is a creative endeavor. And so I do tell my students to focus on those kinds of things. Focus on creating great visuals, focus on telling great stories. Focus again on understanding the business and the strategy and what really moves the needle within your organization. How do people want to be communicated to? And that can be very challenging, and it is. But it's critical to help bring people along to the value of the data and the analytics that you're producing. There's just no other way. I do think it's getting easier, maybe with AI, to be able to tell that story. I think that's a great thing. I wish, 25 years ago, I had AI when I was getting started and just trying to figure out my footing. I think young people getting into analytics have some real challenges ahead of them, but they also have some real advantages over those of us who came out before. And so, yeah, I think spending as much time learning how to tell a good story and spin a good yarn with PowerPoint is as important as Python, maybe more important, because Python is being written by AI every single day, all day long. And it can do a hell of a good job of that. And so, but it doesn't understand the business like you should understand the business, right? And it doesn't understand the people within the business like you can. And so having that building those human relationships is just as important as building a great, data lake, for example.
What kinds of like ancillary skills or interests are you kind of encouraging, the analysts of the future to kind of get into to help them round out those communication, those presentation skills from in terms of what's going to help them truly in their career moving forward?
Yeah, it's the same song I've been singing for a very long time on that front, which is think about creativity, be creative, do creative things. That can be art, that can be music, that can be writing, that can be all of the above. You don't have to be great at it, but creativity helps you get comfortable with ambiguity, which is really important when you're dealing with data. It helps you get comfortable with not having all of the answers, with having to find your way through complicated things until you have something valuable in front of you. And so, yes, and that's been a hard sell. I've worked with some people that are and then I've worked with data scientists who are like, I'm never going to pick up a paintbrush or a guitar. And I say, that's totally fine. That's totally fine. But think like a creative person. And you can learn those skills by doing lots of other things. But remember, data analytics, data science, all of this is a creative endeavor.
I love that phrase that you used, that creativity helps you get comfortable with ambiguity, because I think that's really the critical point, right? Because it's not going to be so simple as you're going to look at this report or this analysis or this visualization, and it's going to tell you exactly what you should do, right? And that's where the human element is always going to be there, because a person has to make the business decision, right? Because a person, to your point, has to understand the business. I mean, there may be times when you want to do something and you want to do it at a loss because maybe there's an issue of market share, right? That needs to be regained, right? So, and there's other times where you don't want to do it as a loss, right? Because it's like, no, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to, grow profitability as an organization. So, being able to understand all those aspects and understand that there is going to always be that ambiguous aspect of it that you're going to have to kind of like wrestle with and wrap your head around and say, okay, given the context, the situation, the markets, where our customers are, where our organizational goals are, and at this moment on this particular day at 10 a.m., this is what the decision we should make, based on the data that I'm seeing. And tomorrow at 10 a.m., that decision may be different because some of those things may have shifted, right?
That's right. And your own confidence is so important in that, right? You don't have all of the answers, but you do have your own confidence and you can recommend things based on your own experience and knowledge. And you have to be brave doing that. And that can be a real challenge, especially early on in your career.
Do you find that when you're kind of at the table, right? When you're sitting at the table with others in your organization, whether that's finance, product, marketing, whether engineering, whatever other kind of people there are at the table, how do you find that typically data is looked at? Do you find it's more like, hey, you're just the person who generates the reports, or do you find that typically that they're more looked at as, hey, you guys are really the source of insights and really kind of like fueling us with not only information but context that we can use to make better decisions? Or do you find that's kind of an evolving thing just based on the organization and the industry? And
It's definitely evolving. I'd say most of my career has been on the sort of analytics and insights side of the equation. I think today I'm focused on data products, so building tangible products in a data mature organization, and so that's been awesome. It's also been a learning experience for me because a lot of my career has been spent sort of having those battles with executives and leaders around: are these insights of value? Are we making better decisions using data? And so I think it does depend on the organization and how far along they are on that maturity curve. But I probably spent the majority of my career on the lower end of that maturity curve, convincing executives to invest in data and to invest in the infrastructure necessary. But I've always been a big fan of talking about insights, about diving in, finding the answers, bringing new answers to the table, but there has to be a balance, right? It cannot be an academic exercise just being data. Data analytics cannot only be an academic exercise. There has to be tangible resources developed, and that could be models, dashboards, whatever, things that people can put in their hand and actually see the value for themselves. But I still encourage individuals to think outside of the product itself to find the deeper insight in the data, because discovery is still an important part of analytics. And I think it always will be and always has to be, even in this era of Gen AI, where you can find those insights pretty quickly, a lot faster than we used to find them back in the day, I can assure you. But you got to know which one of those insights are actually going to deliver value to the organization. They're going to help people make better decisions. They're going to help move the needle. And so, yeah, it's still important. It's still important.
I'm curious to know what you think, because obviously, as you mentioned, I think regardless of the industry agnostic data is just, it's critical and it's important. And it's a key element. It's a fuel that's going to help organizations move forward. But I know I have found that in certain industries, and industries I know you have more familiarity with as well, that are where the product or the service takes a higher level of consideration from the customer. So industries like travel, like finance, right? That arguably even more so, those insights become important because it's not a situation where you're perhaps on Amazon and I'm going to search for some batteries, and that decision and that purchase takes, the sum total of about 60 seconds. When I'm spending more money, when there's more financial or emotional risk to that decision, as is the case when I'm making financial decisions about where to plan my retirement or or where to start a bank account for my child, or in travel when I'm going to spend maybe a few $1,000s on a package or an expensive hotel or resort or something. Those decisions are made over the course of time, right? Maybe days, maybe even weeks of kind of doing research, of kind of doing some comparison, right? When that becomes the case, how have you seen really insights kind of play an even more important role in those kinds of longer buying cycles, longer decision cycles when it comes to certain products and services?
Great question. I mean, obviously, when you have those longer buying cycles, you've got a lot more opportunity there to deliver insights, right? You can get outside of the world of optimization and modeling for a moment and kind of look at that life cycle. And I've always been a big proponent of the customer journey and understanding the customer journey. And so I think you might be alluding to my time at Marriott Vacation, right, with that and the hospitality industry and making those long-term decisions. It's a great challenge too, because it's difficult to get that measure right away, right? You may have laid great groundwork. You might have put the right message in there, the right time, in the right place, but it could take a year for that to pay off. So how do you continue to track those metrics? How do you continue to follow those customers along their journey until that payoff? And then beyond that payoff. And so that was one of the great things I loved about working in hospitality. Actually was that really wide time spectrum that we had to work with, because you could do a lot of unique and creative things in that. Whereas I think if it was a quick turnkey kind of business, you're really focused on optimization. You're focused on those clicks. You're focused on that immediate day-to-day ROI, which can also be exciting, but it's hard to break out of that sometimes. When you have that wider cycle, you've got a lot more flexibility to work.
Do you think, as you think about where kind of the industry is going, 2 or 3 years down the road, do you really see as people look at data more broadly, as you kind of alluded to there, especially when it comes to high consideration, but just across the board, as people look at data more broadly, as we have additional points of data to look at, as we leverage AI to help hopefully kind of stitch together, those different points, how do you see, because I'm changing my question a little bit here, how do you see the role of what we today call a data analyst kind of evolving in that sense, in terms of how they leverage tools like AI has something in their toolbox to help them ultimately accomplish the goal of delivering value to the organization?
The students I work with, obviously, they express some concern Hey, did I choose the right path? And it's actually a hard question to answer. I like to be an optimist. I am also a realist. I understand the impacts it's going to have, especially on those who are early in their career. But if you embrace it, and this is starting to sound like a cliche, right? So if you embrace it, and if you're the person who knows how to use AI, then you'll have an advantage. I think that's true. I think that's true. I do think it's going to have a significant impact on how many analysts we're going to need in this world. I think that's absolutely true. But we had an enormous distance between the demand and the supply of analysts for years, for decades now. And yes, universities stepped up in the last 10 years to bring out more analysts into the world, but AI has also worked to kind of minimize some of the work that they're going to have to do, because a lot of this is going to be natural language, conversational. I want a dashboard. I can build that dashboard simply through conversation. And we've talked for many, many years about the citizen data analyst and enabling people in the organization to become more data literate. We preached that for years and years. And here's Gen AI that's actually going to make that happen. And I think some people in analytics are kind of afraid of that. And I can totally understand why. And I'm also a bit wary of it. But the power that it has to create quality visualizations, create quality stories, to dive into the data and see things that an ordinary person wouldn't see, I think is going to be powerful. And when the agentic world kind of emerges in the next couple of years, I think that power will be even more significant. But there are certainly things that will be challenges for analysts and analytics professionals that Gen AI is going to make somewhat obsolete some of the skills that I've been preaching a long time. Data visualization, I think, will be one of the first to go. But I still think that it's incredibly important to learn the fundamentals if you are getting into data analytics, right? So understanding how to code, understanding what the right visualization is to use at the right time, understanding how to tell that story, all those things will still be important, even in an age where you're just basically having a conversation with your computer to get that output. You're still going to need what do I say to the computer? That's the important part. And if you don't know and don't understand data and how it works and how it connects and how it works together, you're not going to be asking the right questions, right? So it's so important to have those fundamentals.
Just to go a little bit of a tangent of kind of one of those things that's kind of like a pet peeve of mine that I worry about. And this might be just, me being generationally and, a kid of the 80s and that kind of thing. But, I need to understand how things work, right? And it frustrates me sometimes when I see people leverage AI and they ask AI to do something, right? To create something, create a report, to code something or whatever. And then it spits this out. And a person can't look at what AI created and understand the logic behind like what it did. Like they just kind of take for granted, okay, it must have done right what I asked it to do.
Sounds good.
Let's move right. Exactly. Let's move
Sounds
on.
right. Yeah.
And right. And as you well know, AI is far from perfect, right? And there are subtleties in there that it will misinterpret and get a little bit wrong. But if you know what you're looking at, it's done 80 or 90% of the work, and it just takes you tweaking a couple of things to kind of get it. Okay, this is where I need it to be. It still saved you a ton of time. But to your point, that's only if you're able to understand, right? If you still understand the fundamentals and the basics, and you're able to look at the Python code and say, well, I can read this and understand it. Oh, this isn't right. Like that's not what I'm looking for it to do. I just need to switch this here. That's power, and that's going to move you forward. But if you're going in there blind, just thinking, well, I'm just going to tell AI to do it, and it's going to do it, and I don't need to worry about it. Well, that's career suicide, right? Because now you're presenting this as this correct thing, and should that kind of come to the surface and you're caught, well, now it's an issue of like, well, like what were you doing? Like, did we hire you or did we hire ChatGPT? Did we hire you or did we hire Gemini? Like they're not the one doing the job. Like you're there to bring value into the job, right?
Lots of horror stories already in just the last few years across industries about people sort of putting too much trust in AI. And that's why having good AI literacy is so important, understanding the limitations of this incredible technology, because boy, does it sound confident. Boy, does it sound right. But being able to sort of audit it as you go is the critical skill for actually getting the most out of it, for sure.
We talked about the evolution of kind of the job of the data leader. And from the beginning, both you and I, we've been talking about data very broadly, and we know it's not anywhere near that broad. But it's interesting how it used to be, if we go back, I don't know, 10, 15 years, when people talked about data from a digital perspective, it was the web analytics team and the web analysts and kind of what they did. But now today, when we talk about data, it tends to be, the data science team and having a data scientist and kind of what they're doing, right? So we've already kind of seen that evolution of what we define as this kind of expert in data, the team that kind of focuses on it, and the expectations of the team. Because again, if we go back 10 or 15 years and we think about the web analytics team, the expectation was a nice Excel report or maybe a nice dashboard. Like that was the expectation that, of course, no one ever looked at, but that's another story. But now, right, the expectation that we have today at like the data science team are propensity models, right? And those kinds of things that are far more robust. And I suspect there's going to be kind of a curve, right, an acceleration curve in terms of the expectation that's going to be fueled by AI in terms of what the expectations are going to be. Is that something you're kind of seeing and sensing in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, it took many years for people just to embrace data science as a discipline, right? And I think there's still going to be a lot of value in those sort of traditional models, those propensity models. And like I said earlier in the broadcast, hey, there's still organizations that are kind of leaping over that. And if you're leaping over, clustering and propensity models and doing good, solid data science in favor of AI, you're going to miss out a lot. And so an organization that has a good balance of those things will have an advantage. So yeah, I do see an acceleration in the value of data scientists, but also in things like data architecture and data engineering. I think that is going to, be sort of a hot topic over the next few years, is how do you integrate this incredible generative AI technology into your business in the right way. And that's often an engineering and an architecture question, right? Not even a data science question. And then I would ask, hey, are you still building good models in good flexible models that you can look at over time? Or are you leaping over that and jumping right into generative AI thinking that would solve all of your problems? So yeah, I think it comes down to just having the right architecture and the right people in place, um, and really the right frameworks. And we're inventing these frameworks as we go, right? The organizations that are building these um, LLMs, organizations that are working with them, we're all kind of consulting teams. We're all kind of building frameworks and learning as we go. And I've, warning people over the last couple of years, if people are saying they're an expert in generative AI, they're probably lying to you, because we're all learning as we go, and making mistakes along the way and doing some things right too. I mean, I've seen some amazing things just in the last year with my own organization. So it can be done right.
As our listeners are out there, and maybe they're just getting into the world of data themselves, or maybe their organizations are really getting more serious about what they're doing from a data infrastructure standpoint, because maybe they're more legacy and they've neglected this for some time. What's kind of the practical advice that you would give them in terms of where they should invest, where they should focus their energies right now to get them where they need to be? Kind of what are those pillars, or maybe just one or two of those pillars that they should really kind of focus on, that this is what foundation is going to pay dividends to them to be able to get them to move forward the way they want to?
I mean, one I mentioned earlier, which is communication, which is being a solid communicator when it comes to data, being an evangelist for data, and know what's going on in your business, right? Understand your strategy, understand how the money works, how the money flows. I think the other is going to be being comfortable with generative AI and AI, and just in general. Use the tools, use them every day, use them for in your real life, and get comfortable with the positives and the negatives there. Get comfortable with the limits of AI, because you really have to have conversations with generative AI for a while to really understand. I remember the first time I saw ChatGPT. It was about a month after it was released. I'd heard about it. I knew that it was being built, but I didn't have that aha moment until I was visiting. My niece goes, check this out. Now she was, 16 at the time. She was like, I'm going to write a report. Watch this. Boom, 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 boom. It was on the fall of the Roman Empire, and I watched it roll out of ChatGPT. And I went, oh my goodness. I knew the world had changed when I saw that. It shocked me. But every quotation in there was wrong at that time, right? The structure of it was poorly done, but it sounded right, and I almost bought into it right there, but it took me time to figure out, hey, there's nuances here, and these are language models, right? And so just like dealing with humans, you've got to have your kind of radar up for those nuances. And so if you're not using those tools and you don't have a comfort level with those nuances, you're going to embarrass yourself, like you said, you're going to have some career limiting moments. And so those are the two things. Now, 10 years ago, those two things would have been almost the same, right? It would have been get good at communication, but also focus on the fundamentals, right? I think there still should be focus on the fundamentals, but it only as far as understanding the output of the generative AI so that you can interact with that generative, because that is going to be the future. That is absolutely going to be the future, whether we like it or not.
Greg, thank you so much for your time. Great insights.
Oh, my pleasure.
Great perspective that you've given to our listeners here, and really appreciate you, and appreciate you buying out some time to be on the show today.
I really appreciate it.